Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into one of philosophy's heavy hitters, a moral theory that's super powerful and, pretty demanding. We're talking about the ethics of duty, all thanks to Immanuel Kant.
But here's the thing. To really get why Kant's ideas still hit so hard, we're not going to start by cracking open some old, dusty book. Nope, we're starting with a real-world story. And it's a moral disaster.
Take a look at these men. They were part of something called the Tuskegee syphilis study. Now, for 40 years, from 1932 all the way to 1972, U.S. government researchers studied 390 African-American men who had syphilis. But they didn't know that. They were just told they were getting free health care for something called bad blood.
But the deception, it was so much worse than just observing them. These men were actively blocked from getting treatment. Think about this. When penicillin came along in the 40s and became the standard cure, it was deliberately kept from them. They weren't being treated like patients at all. They were treated like lab rats, just so researchers could watch this awful disease run its course and collect data.
And that brings us to a really uncomfortable question, doesn't it? If your only focus is on the outcome, the scientific knowledge they gained that might help other people down the line, well, some ethical theories would have a hard time saying this was 100% wrong. Which makes you wonder, is there a better way to think about morality? A way that isn't just about the final results?
Well, that's exactly where this radical alternative comes in. It's a way of thinking from the 18th century philosopher Immanuel Kant. And for him, the consequences, they're not the most important part of the story.
So, Kant's theory is called deontology. That comes from the Greek word for duty. And it really is like a whole different moral universe. You know how people say, the ends justify the means? That's consequentialism. Kant is the exact opposite. He says some things are never justified no matter what. The whole focus shifts from, did it have a good outcome, to was the action itself right? It's not about what makes you happy, it's about what makes you worthy of being happy.
In this quote right here, it just nails Kant's core idea. For him, some things are just plain wrong, period. It doesn't matter if they lead to a good result for a bunch of people. Morality, for Kant, is all about doing your duty and sticking to absolute moral rules.
Okay, so if it's not about the consequences, then how in the world are we supposed to know what these duties are, right? Did Kant just give us a big book of thou shalts and thou shalt nots? Nope. Instead, he came up with one single master rule, a kind of test for any action you could possibly think of.
He called it the categorical imperative. It sounds a little intimidating, but let's break it down. Categorical just means it applies to everyone, everywhere, no exceptions. And imperative means it's a command. It's something you must do. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is his ultimate morality test. Now, Kant had a couple of different ways of explaining this master rule. The first one is a really powerful thought experiment, and it basically boils down to that question our parents always asked us. Well, what if everybody did that?
Let's try it out with an example Kant himself used. Say you're really in a bind for money. You think about asking for a loan, and you promise you'll pay it back, even though you know you have no way of doing that. So your personal rule, or what Kant called a maxim, is something like, when I need money, I'll make a false promise to get it. Okay, now for the test. Imagine that becomes a universal law. Imagine a world where everyone does that.
So what happens in that world? Well, the whole concept of a promise just falls apart, right? It becomes totally meaningless. Nobody would believe a promise from anyone, which means your lying promise wouldn't even work. You see? The rule basically destroys itself when you make it universal. It's a logical contradiction. And for Kant, if that happens, the action is morally wrong. End of story.
All right, so that was the first version. The second version of the categorical imperative is, I think, maybe even more direct. It really gets to the human heart of what Kant was talking about, and man, is it powerful. Basically, it boils down to this. Don't use people. Now, that needs a little clarification. It's okay to treat people as a means to something. I mean, we do it every day. When you order a coffee, the barista is a means to you getting your caffeine fix. But the key word in Kant's phrase is simply. You can never treat people simply as a means to an end, as just a tool for your own goals.
And why not? Well, for Kant, it's because human beings are special. We're rational creatures. We're autonomous. We can think for ourselves, set our own goals, make our own choices. And because of that, every single person has an inherent dignity, an intrinsic value. We're not just objects to be pushed around or used. We are, as he put it, ends in ourselves, and we have a fundamental duty to respect that in ourselves and in every other person.
And this brings us right back to Tuskegee and what was so deeply, horrifyingly wrong there. Those researchers treated those 390 men as nothing more than tools. They were used simply as a means to get to an end, in this case, scientific knowledge. Their own goals, their health, their basic dignity as human beings, none of it mattered. It is a textbook, tragic violation of Kant's rule.
So, okay, these are ideas from centuries ago. Why should we still care? Why does Kant still matter today?
Well, just think about some of the most important values we hold. That idea that every single person has inherent dignity and worth, that's pure Kant. The principle of informed consent in medicine and research, the exact rule that was so horribly broken in the Tuskegee study, that's built directly on the Kantian idea that you can't use someone with their rational consent. The entire concept of universal human rights, it's standing on the shoulders of Kant's philosophy.
And so that leaves us with a pretty challenging final thought, doesn't it? We live in a world that is just obsessed with results, with the bottom line, with what works. But Kant's philosophy forces us to stop and ask a totally different question, and maybe a much more important one. It's not just what's the best outcome, it's what is the right thing to do? What is our duty?